I am so delighted that we're now dealing with cities because, in my judgment, this is the place where we can have the most amount of change. And it's where the rubber hits the road, particularly around the climate issue. So what I want to speak to tonight is how do we empower citizens to adopt low-carbon lifestyles? The strategies and tools that we've built over the last 20 years to do that, the community engagement mechanisms we've developed to do that, and what we've learned from that is how it begins to reinvent a city. Because this is not just about education and outreach. This is about a transformational intervention to bring a city to a new place in relationship to its citizens, and just what's possible when that occurs. So in the spirit of transformation, I think that we'll begin to see some new possibilities that we may not have seen before. So it starts with the imagination. When we began, all we had were the questions. How do we empower people to adopt sustainable lifestyles? How do we scale that? What's possible for our cities? How do we tackle the sustainability issue? Where do citizens fit? We had no strategies, we had no tactics, we didn't have any literature reviews, we just started with the questions and put one foot in front of another and began to get some answers. So I think that's where a lot of us are right now as we take the next steps on the journey to build the kind of cities we need to build and the world we need to build and to tackle climate change, which right now we're really just working around the margins. So the first question I think we need to answer is, why bother getting people to lower their carbon footprint? Is there not an easier way? Because this is not the easy way. This is the hard way. But is there another way around it? And the simple answer is, because this is where the carbon is. This is the low-hanging fruit, actually, and where the carbon is. Our research shows that when you put transportation and you put energy use together, 50% of America's carbon footprint comes from the residential sector. In a city, it's 50 to 90%. It's where the carbon is. And it's available right now. We can pick this fruit if we know how. And where to do it? Cities, because that's where the people are, and that's where the opportunity lies. So that's where we have to crack the code of behavior change and citizen engagement. So how do we do it? What I've identified is the 4 traditional ways that it has been done in the past. I call it the box. And the first are awareness and information campaigns. The belief is if people just knew, they would act. Or if they just were inspired with a sense of awareness that this is an important problem, they would act. And what we've learned is that people have a hard time translating what they know into behavioral change. Think about all the things that you do in your life, or all the things you should do in your life that you know you should do and don't do. So awareness doesn't translate into behavioral change. In fact, social science research calls it minimal effects: awareness campaigns, information campaigns. The other tools that have been used are command and control. If we could just pass a law, it's the low-hanging fruit we think. Just legislate it because it's scalable. But how hard is it to create legislation? We've seen what's happened at the national level. It hasn't worked at all. So command and control, even if you could pull it off, is a very draconian approach to actually getting people to change. And there's a lot of pushback. So not a very effective strategy. Financial incentives. One of the things that has become very clear in my work here with Jonathan is the myth of the rational actor. We've heard that communicated a few times. John Gowdy speaks to that in his paper. We don't act based on maximizing utility for return on investment. Economists think we do, at least the old school. So financial incentives can get some movement, but it's not enough to close the deal for most people. It's a value added. And the least understood and what I call the most insidious form of attempting to create behavioral change is monocultural thinking. What I mean by that is a way of thinking, it's more like thinking from the supply side. We want to do retrofits because that's where energy efficiency can happen. So let's get everyone to do retrofits. single action orientation. Or we're the water department. Let's get water conservation to happen. So single issue, single agency, and then also approaching the person one by one. So a single person, not having anything beyond just the agency or the issue and the one person. And so what happens is we're not really thinking about how an individual thinks. And what we find is that individuals don't think, how do I retrofit my house? Or how do I conserve water? What they think is, how do I create a green lifestyle? Or how do I create a low-carbon lifestyle, if they think that at all? So we have to start thinking out of the box. We have to start thinking laterally about how individuals actually need to be, what they think about, what would touch them, what would inspire them. So some clues about the predicament we're in. And one of the systems that I have found most powerful to study is how the natural world has evolved, or how evolution has taken place on this planet. And one of the single most important acts for life on this planet was the shift from the single-cell organism to the multicellular organism when there was a need to solve a greater level of complexity for life on this planet. We created the multicellular organism. We began to move out of the single to the multiple and the potential synergy that that brings. Another clue is from social systems. Why is it that 1 out of every 10 people on our planet is on Facebook? What does that say about the need for social connection? How can we use that knowledge and that innate human drive? A third is this wonderful quote we've probably all seen many times from Margaret Mead: never doubt that a small group of people, committed individuals, can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has. The power of a small group to achieve large outcomes, and the power of people's desire to make a difference. When you put all of those things together, we have a question. And this is the question that we have been working with pretty diligently for a long time, albeit it's got a new version as climate change has now become so prominent in our thinking. How can we harness the evolutionary impulse for greater social connection and the desire to make a difference to address the climate change issue? It's very different than, how do I get retrofits? It's a very different kind of question, and it leads to very different kinds of answers. So, brief history, then I want to talk a little bit about our work in San Antonio, and then where we're trying to take this work nationally and beyond. We began this journey when we found out that the highest leverage point for intervention around the sustainability issue is our consumption practices. This is where we had to make a difference. And so we set out in 1990, actually, before that Earth Summit, with these questions in mind. The Earth Summit confirmed what we had already seen as the key driver for dealing with our sustainability challenge as a human species. Can a social engagement network help people adopt environmentally sustainable lifestyles? Small groups of people coming together. Can that get us across from this knowing we should do it to actually doing it? Will this behavior change be sustained over time? Can we get this so it doesn't recede, so there's no recidivism, it doesn't recede after short-term change happens? And can we make this replicable and scalable? Those were the questions that we began our journey with. And Susan, are you here? Susan Anderson and one of my colleagues, we began this journey together in Portland in 1995, and so you'll see some of what we've learned since then, but she helped us take the journey in the very first stages. So these were the results we got. We worked with some 20,000 people. We put all the overwhelm of information into these basic topics: solid waste, water, energy, transportation, and green purchasing, and these were the results that we got. We answered the question pretty definitively: can you get substantive behavior change? Can you get someone to significantly reduce their impact on the planet? And the answer was yes. There was a lot of opportunity. The second question was, can we get this behavior change to be sustained? I'm moving through a lot of years, so I'm just giving you the very high-level results without all the iterative learning, and I'll speak to some of the iterative learning process a little later. But the second question was, is it sustained over time? Every one of the cities we worked with asked us the same question because they wanted to know if their return on investment was working. And what we found was yes. Not only was it sustained, but in some cases it was actually improved upon 2 years later. And we've had several longitudinal studies done. The third question, and the most demanding, and the one that took us the most amount of time to figure out, was how do you scale and replicate behavioral change? Once you've got a workable process, is this just for the green elite? Or can, in fact, this go deeper and wider into a community? And we came across a guy named Everett Rogers. Some of you may know him, a social science researcher out of Stanford, who wrote a book called The Fusion of Innovation. And Rogers was a godsend to me because he gave me my organizing principle for community organizing, which basically is that, and just a little background on his research, he studied over 50 years, 1,500 case studies of how ideas spread. New seed strains for farmers, new medicines for doctors, family planning, new technologies. And you may know some of these terms. He's the one who coined them. The first group he calls the early adopters. They have a high tolerance for experimentation and they seek out the new. And what he found was that if you can get about 15% of a group of people, 15% of a block, 15% of the blocks in a neighborhood, 15% of the communities in a county, you hit a tipping point. Not all social innovations will hit that tipping point and begin diffusing, but if you have all the conditions right and it hits that tipping point, it begins diffusing on its own momentum. That is to say, you don't have to push it. And the key takeaway, preach to the choir. The choir will sing loud enough to bring everyone into the church. The key way that many social change agents operate, don't preach to the choir, preach to the laggards. Preach to the people who are least receptive, and they end up throwing cold water. So we can get smarter on how we design our strategies. And so we tested out a lot of platforms. We worked with service clubs. We worked with faith-based groups. We worked with social networks. We worked with neighborhood groups, workplaces, and we were able to form these teams and get pretty good results pretty much wherever we did it. But when we got to the neighborhood, which everyone said don't go to because it's the most complicated, we got a result that was unexpected. We discovered that we were able to have diversity. It was no longer just monocultural, do something for the planet. It was get to know your neighbors. It was create a healthier, safer block to live on. And even the message, do something for the environment, was not do something for the environment. What we learned was do something for the sake of your children. So now we're in values. We're not in imploring people to change based on some fear or based on some consequence that they don't know what to do with. Do something for your children. Tap into this desire to make a difference. So what we found was that we were able, just to go back to that, we were able to get 25% of the people on the block to participate. 85% of the people, well into the late majority, when a neighbor delivered that message to their neighbor, were predisposed. They said they would come to the meeting. Half came, and 75% joined. That was in Portland, Columbus, Ohio, Kansas City, Missouri, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. It was not just the neighbors, the neighborhoods that one would think would be the likely suspects because of these co-benefits. So fast forward now, I got asked by the city of San Antonio, who got some funding from the Department of Energy to do retrofits and to deal with building sustainability in their city. And they asked if we could apply this methodology, not starting with the neighborhoods, but with their own employees, because they wanted to build a sustainability ethic. And they have something there called Mission Verde. They are one of these next wave of sustainability-oriented cities that have recognized that the future of the city is dependent upon their ability to deal with sustainability. They perceive this as the issue of the 21st century, to build a 21st century economy. And what they said to us was, we want to walk our talk as a city, but then what we realized was that we were doing green jobs programs, We were doing all kinds of supply-side interventions, but we weren't getting people to actually take advantage. We had all these people trained, but we had no demand for these green jobs. So we wanted to see if we could build demand from the bottom up. So these were the goals: building a sustainability culture, using these eco-teams of these 5 to 8 households to green their departments, and then seeing if we could get a breakthrough around retrofits. Some of you may know the actual conversion rate, when it's even studied, is something like 1% or 2%. People who were originally approached converted to actually get retrofits. It's not a very significant number. It is not actually very low-hanging fruit. It's actually extremely hard to do. And we wanted to see if this process could actually facilitate a different kind of an outcome. We had always had that as part of a program, but we never studied it until this issue now arose and all the money became available. So we ended up working with 19 of the 40 departments in the city, 10,000 employees ultimately. 88% of the people who came to the meetings joined an eco-team. Once they came, just like we found on the blocks, actually a much better recruitment rate, they wanted to be part of it. We were able to have, on average, 16 actions taken. And here was the number that was really kind of knocking our socks off. We didn't actually encourage them to do any kind of a retrofit action. But based on the process and all of the elements that were in place, 41% of the people who went through this program did some level of retrofit, which was, exciting to us and to the city. So here's some of the things that we think enable that. We have not done a study formally, so all I can do is extrapolate from the data we have and some of the commentary we got from the people. The first thing we started seeing was we called performance-oriented support systems, or peer support systems. That is to say, we created groups that held each other accountable for producing results. They started helping each other to make these changes. They formed groups that helped make the retrofits, and you'll see some of the different things. They gave technical assistance to each other. They did demonstrations. They were able to actually help people translate their good intention into awareness, good intention and awareness into behavioral change. And I think this is probably one of the most significant ones. We built a new social norm. So you'll see the group started now doing thermostat replacements together. They started doing retrofits together. There now was a new social norm, a new social ethic. So what was the code we call the DNA source code that allowed these kinds of results to accrue? The first thing that we've learned over these couple of decades working with tens of thousands of these groups is the right size group is very critical. 5 to 8 households creates enough social connection so that people really bond with their colleagues or their neighbors. Too many starts to make it very difficult, and it starts to become like a seminar. But when it's small enough, you can actually get people to support one another. The ease of use is very important. We took the overwhelm of information, we broke them into these modular topics, and we created recipes. First you do this, then you do this, then you do this. It wasn't a checklist. It wasn't go to this site. It wasn't just telling people the action. It was an actual systematic recipe, like you're cooking a meal. So again, how to get people to actually act on their good intention once they decide to act. The third thing we found was we moved this group of individuals into a team. We started creating a team purpose statement. So all of a sudden, this group now had a vision that was pulling them. They had a team leader. They had shared responsibilities. Interestingly enough, while this was going on, we had some people try to do eco-teams through like community colleges, and no one would come. There was no connection. I mean, they would come and they would just see it as a class, but when the group was actually working together, we were able to get the team effect to help people through the process. And we created a group process protocol. Peer support systems, accountability, and feedback. And when you have this performance ethic, we were getting 95% completion rates of these teams. So, outcomes, I'll start to close down. We started seeing green economic development, building demand, social capital was generated, high-performance teams, social innovation, and socially engaged citizens. And this particular slide, I think, is very significant because we can't get carbon as a seller to stand alone. We've got to build the green economic development engine to drive a climate change strategy in a community. And what we saw was that we can begin to do this. And we started getting socially engaged citizens. They moved through the whole spectrum of volunteering. In many cases, they were now on city councils or mayors. So last piece, just to close out, where is this all leading? I wrote a book, some of you may know, Low Carbon Diet. It became a phenomena in the sense that it became the personal action go-to thing, and so thousands of people began using it. 300 communities began to deploy it in some form or other. We found that we were able to get a 25% carbon footprint reduction, but what we found was that we were a mile wide and an inch deep. To get to scale, we realized we had to go deep into a small number of communities. And so we've looked at the system conditions for scaling a cool community. We think that the time is right for scaling a cool community or a carbon reduction strategy in a community. We know that you need to have all these ingredients for that to work, right? Community, political will, and so forth. And what we're trying to do now is to find 5 cities to push the envelope, to change the game around the whole carbon reduction issue in cities by driving it through the bottom. And so we're now looking for 5 teaching cities that will be models. We want to get 25% of the population to reduce their footprint 25%. We want to do that in a 3-year period. We want to get a 40% buy-in of retrofits. We want to build a green economic development strategy around that. We want to start to reinvest the social capital in terms of livability and resiliency and going to some of the social equity issues that are necessary for cities to make this stuff work. And we're starting to work with universities to build a carbon neutral transition plan with this carbon literate community as the baseline to build from. And then pilot it, demonstrate it, and scale it. These are some of the partners that are now working with us, and we're building new partners all the time. The first city has signed up, Ithaca, and we're working with Cornell Cooperative Extension also and their students. So, to close, thank you for the extra few moments, Jonathan. Here's what I see as possible. Here's what I see the reinvention of a city looking like. Here's what I think the climate dividend really is. If we engage our citizens, we begin to get them to adopt behaviors that will further the sustainability, livability, and economic vitality of a community. This is now doable. We can drive this change as we engage citizens. If we start to engage citizens in this way, we start building this block by block, and the quality of every block is improved. Not the neighborhood in this broad sense, the block. Multiple blocks build the neighborhood. Building the capacity of citizens in this way allows us to have change leaders that can drive the larger changes. And when we get citizens and government working together, you have a new kind of compact that can make change happen at a level that none of us have imagined. And we've seen this happen in small enough scales, and we think it's possible. And lastly, socially engaged and empowered citizenry owning their commitment to the livability, sustainability, and economic vitality and resiliency of a community starts to create the base to build whatever our imaginations will allow. So this is my mantra. I suspect it's the mantra of many of us. Again and again in history, some people wake up. They have no ground in the crowd. They move to broader, deeper laws. We're learning some of those broader and deeper laws. They carry strange customs. We're learning those customs. And they demand room for bold and audacious action. What is the boldest idea that we have for our cities, for our work as change agents? Are we acting on that? If not, why? If we don't have that dream, what can we do to create that dream? They change the world. I thank you.